This will be Manning. Back to throw. Across the middle. Pass complete. Ball down at the 35, to the 40, to the 45, to the 50, to the 45, to the 40, to the 35, 30, 25, 20, 15, 10, 5. What did he do? All he did was score. Joey Kent. Touchdown on play number 1.
You're listening to the RTI Podcast, powered by RockyTopInsider.com.
Welcome into the Rocky Top Insider Recruiting Podcast. This is your host, Ben McKee. I am joined by Matt Ray of VR2, who has teamed up with Sports Illustrated, bringing you great content, both recruiting and with the current team. This is our first recruiting podcast that we have done together, and I'm super excited. Obviously, people are aware that Nathaniel Rutherford stepped down as managing editor of RTI, and this is the first recruiting podcast that we have been able to get together and churn out, so to speak. And took me a minute to kind of get my bearing and figure out how we were going to go about recording it and whatnot. But now that we've kind of gotten that out of the way, we definitely want to continue to put out recruiting podcasts, teaming up together. I know it's something that I received a ton of questions about, Matt, kind of as I took over. Are you all going to keep the recruiting podcast with VR2 going? Absolutely. That is the plan. Maybe it did not happen as quick as we wanted it to, but I'm super excited to keep those going. You all and Nathaniel did such a great job putting those out, and I know a lot of people love them, so super excited about that. But once again, I am Ben McKee, and I am joined by Matt Ray, publisher of VR2, who has teamed up with Sports Illustrated. Matt, how are you today?
Doing good, Ben, man. Good to be here with you. Like you said, I think I fielded a lot of questions on if we were going to keep this podcast going, and it's good to finally get back in here and record one today.
Absolutely. And boy, do we have plenty to talk about. It has been a great week along the offensive line for Tennessee. On Monday, Tennessee picks up a commitment. And really, you knock out two birds with one stone when you pick up Jamarion Gooch, because not only does he commit to Tennessee, but in the process, he flips from Auburn, who, as Tennessee fans are well aware, Auburn has given Tennessee plenty of problems on the recruiting front over the last decade or so. So I know Tennessee felt good flipping Jamarion Gooch from Auburn to Tennessee on Monday. And then today, on Friday, William Griffin-Parker, a three-star offensive tackle from the Mid-State from Pearl Cone High School there in Nashville, commits to Tennessee over Alabama. And yes, he was legitimately considering Alabama. I know some people look at that, oh, he's a three-star. That offer wasn't truly committable. No, Alabama absolutely wanted William Griffin-Parker, Matt, and it's a big pickup for Tennessee.
Yeah, he had a committable offer to Alabama. It's a big pickup, and it's always big for Tennessee to be able to keep an in-state kid home. But you're talking about an in-state kid who's right there in Nashville, and that seems like the area that gets cherry-picked a little bit from schools coming in and taking kids. For William, Alabama was his dream school. He grew up around there. His grandpa was a fan, had family members that were fans. And Alabama really made a strong push for him. So for Tennessee to be able to weather that storm, grab his commitment, and get another key piece on the offensive line, it speaks volumes of what Jeremy Pruitt and Will Friend have been able to do since taking over and really revamping the trenches in Knoxville.
Absolutely. And I love the way that William approached his commitment, because as you said, he grew up an Alabama fan, but you continually saw comments from him on multiple publications speaking about, he grew up an Alabama fan, but that doesn't mean that he's a lock to go to Alabama. He realizes that this is a business decision, and that's how he approached his recruitment. And, maybe the fact that Alabama is on the verge of signing one of the greatest offensive line classes that we've seen in modern day recruiting. They have the number one offensive tackle committed, the number 3 offensive tackle committed, the number 1 center committed. They are racking up along the offensive line. And maybe that did play a part in Williams' decision to pick Tennessee. But nonetheless, Alabama put on the full court press here the last week or so to try and steal William from right underneath Tennessee's nose, right there in the mid-state. As you mentioned, teams tend to do that. But this is a tremendous pickup for Tennessee, and I think it speaks volumes about kind of the health of Tennessee's program, because he doesn't have to come in and play right away.
Yeah, and that's something that Williams voiced. He doesn't feel like that he's all the way there. He feels like he can go anywhere and compete, but he's really excited to get that hands-on coaching, refine that technique, and he knows he's a strong kid. He's a guy that when we evaluated as All-American candidates, that he was a guy we thought had one of the highest ceilings on the offensive line in the country, and he's really excited to get that coaching and be able to fully utilize that strength. And he knows that there's the option to go play at Tennessee, and he knows that the Tennessee coaches will play him early if he's good enough. But at the same time, he's excited about that refinement and what they can develop him into. So that played a big part in his decision, and really talking with him last night before the announcement, he's really excited to play for Will Friend.
Absolutely. And as you would expect, Will Friend and Jeremy Pruitt and Jim Chaney as well have really established a great track record here the last year or so to be able to develop offensive linemen that have come into Tennessee's program. You saw some concerns from fans after year one, because that 2018 Tennessee offensive line was not good. I have joked. I think I have joked. I might have been halfway serious, but that 2018 offensive line was not a Division I offensive line, not a Power 5 offensive line.
Not at all.
There were so many holes in that offensive line, and they got off to a slow start last season in year two under Jeremy Pruitt, but the development of Wanye Morris and Darnell Wright as the season progressed. You've seen Brandon Kennedy stay healthy. You've seen Trey Smith stay healthy. On top of that, guys like Riley Locklear, K'Ron Calvert, Jerome Carvin, those guys have continued to develop as well. And so, yeah, Tennessee hasn't gotten back to what Tennessee should be yet, which makes it harder to recruit against the likes of Alabama, Florida, who is also in it with William Parker Griffin as well at times. But they can see the track record of Will Friend and Jim Chaney and what those two have been able to do over the last year or so, just when you look at Wanye Morris and Darnell Wright.
Yeah, and you talk about that 2018 offensive line. They were, they weren't there, but Tennessee still went out and signed one of the most impressive offensive line hauls in the country, which another tip of the cap to Will Friend and Jeremy Pruitt. And it seemed like, hey, these are the guys we have to get. And then they showed why it was so important to get those guys. They played those freshmen right away. They were both honored with some kind of all-freshman honor. And when you start doing that and you can start, putting that out on social media and showing your program, then you can start going head-to-head a little bit more. And that's why you see Tennessee, they flip Jamarion Gooch from Auburn. They grab William Parker, but then they still have a couple of their top targets that they're in on, like Amarius Mims and Rod Orr, guys that are more refined, are more polished, and with an even higher ceiling. So, it's refreshing to see what Tennessee has done there, and it's amazing that they've been able to do it in the short time that they have.
Yeah, and the two things that have really stood out to me in the addition of Jamarion Gooch and William Griffin-Parker is that, A, we shouldn't look at the recruiting ranking. They're only a 3-star. Williams in the 400s on the 247 composite. Gooch is, I think, 790th overall in the 247 composite. I don't need to see that for me to validate that these are good prospects that Tennessee is receiving. Just look at the offer list. Recruiting rankings are important for perception, but I care more about who has offered these players at any position. Who has offered them, and are they committable offers? And with Jamarion Gooch, who we'll get into here in just a moment, he flipped them from Auburn, Jeremy Pruitt and Will Friend and Jim Chaney. And say what you will about Gus Malzahn, offensive line play has not been a problem for Gus Malzahn during his time at Auburn. There have been numerous offensive linemen that he has brought in they've developed, and they've sent off to the NFL. So for Gooch to be committed to a place that has had success developing offensive linemen over the last decade or so, to flip him from Auburn to Tennessee, that speaks volumes to me about the player that Jamarion Gooch can be, assuming he develops correctly. And same with William as well. He's a guy that, again, Alabama legitimately wanted. I'm sure there will be Alabama fans on social media clamoring over, he's a 3-star. Nick Saban in Alabama, we didn't really want him. No, Nick Saban loves William Griffin-Parker. He truly, truly does. And he really wanted his services, even with the offensive linemen that they already have committed. So that's kind of the first thing that stands out to me. And then it also just speaks to the health of the program, that Tennessee no longer has to go out and get guys that have to play immediately. Yeah, it would be nice to go and get that Amarius Mims, which Tennessee may do so, and Amarius can play from day one. And maybe Gooch and Griffin-Parker can play from day one, but they don't have to, because Wanye is there. Darnell Wright is there. Young guys like Jerome Carvin are there. Cooper Mays, Javonte Spraggins, and R.J. Perry, 3 young offensive linemen that have already impressed within the first 2 to 3 weeks of camp. So I think it really speaks to the health of the program as well, and how quickly those coaches have flipped the offensive line, because these guys don't have to come in and produce right away, which is only going to benefit these 2 young men in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about the offer list speaking for itself. You look back at just 3-4 days ago, September 1st is a big day for juniors in high school. Coaches can start contacting. Well, August 1st is big for seniors in high school, because a lot of those guys get a wake-up call. You're reporting 41 verbal offers, but you only had 3 official offers come in when August 1st hit. And, you look at William, and, he tweets out across his social media, he had Alabama, he had Tennessee, he had Louisville, Kentucky, Florida, and Georgia, all with an official offer for him. So, that speaks to itself right there. And you kind of have to look at those things. And the recruiting rankings are great, but how many camps have William Parker or Jamarion Gooch been to? You can only watch so much on film. If these kids don't come out and they don't participate at certain camps, it's tough for an analyst to evaluate them further and look at their upside and see more potential when you can only look at a 3-minute huddle film. So there's so much that goes into it, and so many people that do a good job with that. But a lot of times, and especially in a year like this, you're handicapped. So, like you say, I think grabbing both of these guys speaks to kind of the state of where Tennessee's offensive line is and where it's heading towards the future. Because if you look at Alabama, that's what you see from them. You see guys come in and they're coveted. Other schools wanted them, but they don't play for 2 to 3 years. But when they come in and play, they're automatically being talked about as a potential draft pick. So that's where you have to get your program to. Yeah,
and to your point, Tennessee is trying to get to where Alabama and Georgia are this season, where even Florida, to a certain extent, not necessarily on the level of Georgia and Alabama, but what I mean by that is Georgia and Alabama are replacing a ton along the offensive line. Alabama's only replacing one body technically in Jedrick Wills, the right tackle who was drafted in the first round of the NFL draft by the Cleveland Browns. That's a significant talent, but they have guys in their program like a Jamarion Gooch, like a William Griffin-Parker, who are very talented guys, but they don't have to play from day one. They can sit behind Jedrick Wills for a year, for 2 years, and then when he leaves to the NFL, such is going to be the case with Darnell Wright, Wanye Morris, then those guys behind them can step in and pick up where those guys left off. And especially with Georgia. Georgia's the better example. Georgia has to replace pretty much everybody along the offensive line, and their offensive line likely isn't going to skip a beat with Trey Hill at center, with Ben Cleveland at right guard, and they have some very talented freshmen who are pushing to start at both tackle positions. That's where Tennessee is trying to really get to. And you talked about this a moment ago, but Jeremy Pruitt, obviously Jim Chaney, those two guys have been in the SEC for a long time, multiple places, and they understand the importance of winning the line of scrimmage, not only on the defensive side of the ball, but on the offensive side of the ball as well. And Tennessee fans should know all about the importance of protecting your quarterback. Say what you will about Jared Guarantano. There for a while, he really struggled in part because he had no time to throw the football, and he was seeing ghosts, and that was because of that 2017, 2018 offensive line. So I think it also speaks to the health of Tennessee's program. Is just a simple fact of having a head coach, an offensive coordinator, an offensive line coach that realizes that you have to be strong up front along the offensive line. You have to be strong up front along the defensive line to win in the SEC. I think that's also – it sounds so simple, but it's not something that Tennessee had under Derek Dooley or Butch Jones. So even that just speaks to the health of the program. And that's why you will continue to see, as you just mentioned, Tennessee continuing to recruit Rod Orr, continuing to recruit Amarius Mims. They continue to try and talk with Diego Pounds, but it's just hard to gain some traction there, kind of the situation with Dietrich Pennington as well. They're going to continue to recruit the offensive line. And, yeah, they only have 25 spots, but it seems like they are willing to sacrifice a body here or there at other positions to make sure that offensive line is shored up.
Yeah, it does. Like you said, they continue to try to communicate with Diego Pounds, and they have for months, but it's been hard to gain traction there. But, you know, they continue to key in on targets. They continue to evaluate guys. And if you'd have told me 3 months ago that Tennessee would have had Amarius Mims visiting campus on his own 3 times in 5 weeks, I would have lost money. I mean, you know, another credit to Will Friend. And, you know, you can lean back on that body of work. And Jim Chaney's been at Georgia. He saw Georgia. He can talk about both sides of the spectrum. So there's just so much experience with these guys and the value from their previous coaching stops that allow them to get deep into these battles like this. And you find a kid like Rod Orr, who out of the group that we're talking about, he may be one of the most refined already. You know, depending on where you look at, he's a high-end 4-star. But you know, you go find a kid that's not too far from home. His cousin's committed to your program in Rock Taylor. His family is Tennessee fans. You can make pushes for kids and get well-refined kids. It's really interesting to see how Tennessee has approached this offensive line class that everybody was kind of worried about for a while with the numbers that they have, like you said. So they're willing to continue to take guys, you know, William Parker, you know, like we kind of talked about before we came on, Ben, this isn't the end of the offensive line haul for Tennessee. It's really just the beginning. You know, there's other guys that are going to continue to take guys. So it's going to be fun to watch how it plays out and fills out, I think.
Yeah, and I'm with you. If you would have told me at the beginning of the summer that by the time the season started, Tennessee was going to be looking good along the offensive line and recruiting, I don't know that I would have believed you, because Tennessee was striking out with some guys, and they have since gained a lot of traction with guys like Rod Orr, who Tennessee is firmly in the mix for. Amarius Mims, who is Georgia, Tennessee right now. Auburn may still sneak back up in there. But right now it's Georgia, Tennessee. And you mentioned his 3 visits and 5 weekends. Not only was he here, but his mother was here with him. And I think that speaks volumes to where Tennessee is in that recruitment. And they have obviously surged with Jamarion Gooch, who is committed to Auburn since April. That was one of the guys that they struck out on early. And then now William Griffin-Parker, just a tremendous offensive line class. Now 3 years in a row. You go back and you look at the Wanye Morris and Darnell Wright class, and then this past class did not have the 5-star power that Wanye or Darnell had, but Cooper Mays is going to be a very productive football player. Javonte Spraggins, he, as I mentioned earlier, he has looked good early on in camp with some guys out due to contact tracing with COVID. He's filled in nicely. R.J. Perry, who might be the biggest surprise of camp, switching over from the defensive line to the offensive line and has looked good in doing so, which it's surprising because he didn't have that big name, but it's not surprising when you remember that he was a very athletic basketball player as well, and it makes sense that he can kind of make that flip to the offensive side of the ball and do well. So, and then now you're piling this offensive line class on these past 2, and that's how you get back to being Tennessee of old. It is consecutive, really strong offensive line classes. that are going to lead to you having one of the better offensive lines in the SEC year in and year out.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you can take a guy like you mentioned, an R.J. Perry, who was the Class 5A Mr. Basketball in Alabama last year, and utilize that athleticism, move him over, experiment with guys, get experience, and then you can bring in guys that are hungry, guys like William Parker, who wants coaching, who has all the size, who has the raw tools, Jamarion Gooch, who is massive in every aspect of the word, and they want to come in and compete. That is where your program starts to thrive. And I feel like for Tennessee, for Jeremy Pruitt, Will Friend, it always had to start right there. It always had to start with, if we are going to be successful at Tennessee, we're going to make it more than 3 years. It had to start on the offensive line, and it did. And they've continued to do well there. It's really amazing. And going back to Amarius, having his mom up here has been huge, and he's also spent time with Cody Brown and Dylan Brooks. I think Brooks may be one of the wild cards for him. They're very relatable. They get along well. They're both laid back. They're kind of quiet, kind of shy. And obviously he spent time with other recruits at Georgia and Brock Vandegrift, but he's came up to Tennessee. He's got to know other recruits. He's got to know Caden Salter over the time. He hasn't got to meet him in person, but, Tennessee's working every angle with him. So it's going to be interesting to see how this offensive line haul can stack up to a couple of really, really good offensive line hauls since Jeremy Pruitt and Will Friend have had 2 full recruiting cycles under their belt now.
It will definitely be fun to see how this continues to play out, because as I said a moment ago, if you would have told me at the beginning of the summer that Tennessee was going to be in the mix with Amarius Mims, firmly in the mix with Amarius Mims by the time the season rolled around, I don't think I would have believed you, but it is good to see Tennessee get in the mix there. A couple of things that I want to talk about before we get out of here is I want to dive into Jamarion Gooch a little bit more and what you think Tennessee is getting in Gooch.
Yeah, I think Tennessee's getting a prospect with obviously a high ceiling. I think we wrote an article that said, Vols are getting a massive offensive lineman with an extremely high ceiling, and somebody said he's 6'8". It better be a high ceiling, But all joking aside, he bends fairly well for his size. He doesn't have to bend that well at high school. He doesn't have to leverage that much in close quarters because of some of the competition he's playing, for one, and for two, he's stronger than every possible person on the field. But, when you look at his motor, you look at his ability to move, you look at his athleticism, the wingspan, he's a fairly intelligent kid. There's so much that you can do with him and mold him into. You have to be excited about the aspect of being able to plug and play him all across the offensive line at a tackle position, at a guard position. And, he picked up offers early in his career as a defender. So, again, you talk about R.J. Perry making waves coming from the defense to the offense. If it came down to it, Gooch is a guy who could flip the script and go the other way next year. So, Tennessee wanted him in this class bad. He committed to Auburn in April, kind of surprised a lot of people. And when I talked to him before he went and flipped the commitment and made it public, it was Tennessee that never stopped prioritizing it. Other schools came in. Georgia came in, communicated. Florida came in, some other schools came in, communicated with him, but Tennessee never stopped. They continued to recruit him, and that sold them. And, again, as you mentioned, it's big to flip a kid like that away from Auburn, and you look at what Auburn's been able to do. That kind of has to speak volumes for itself. But you're talking about another guy who, if you need him, he's a huge body, can plug and play multiple places on the offensive line, but also has that versatility that Pruitt and company covet, and he can flip the script and go to the defensive side if he needed to. You talk about a massive space eater at a 0 or a 1 tech for, even if you need him 10 plays a game, he's there. So a lot of versatility, a lot of upside, a lot of potentials with Jamarion Gooch.
And a lot of athleticism. That was the word that I got back on Jamarion Gooch, is that when college coaches have called the Kings Academy head coach, Jonathan Sellers. They've raved about his size and how he can move at that size. It is unheard of to move as well as he does at 6'7", 350 pounds. And he still needs to work on his bend, but his bend at that size for somebody who has only played 13 games along the offensive line at the high school level is so impressive. And he's not an immediate impact guy, as you and I have both talked about on this podcast today, but he is a guy who has so much potential. I mean, he may have as much potential as Amarius Mims, quite honestly. If it clicks for him at 6'7", and whatever weight that Tennessee will try to get him down to, that's the type of first round offensive lineman that you are seeing drafted nowadays. Not saying that he's going to be a first round draft pick. Please don't take that away from what I just said. But he is that prototypical first round offensive tackle when you talk about size, athleticism, and potential. And again, he started playing offensive tackle 16 months ago. Last Friday's game for TKA was his 13th start along the offensive line. So there's still a long ways for him to go. But if it clicks for him, and if Tennessee is able to develop him like they should, he's going to be a game changer for Tennessee's offensive line. So Tennessee is definitely excited about the addition of Jamarion Gooch from just down the road in good old Seymour, Tennessee. And they'll have to continue to fight off Auburn, Matt. You know, Auburn's that pesky bully right around the corner. I don't know if bully's the right word because it's Auburn, not Alabama or Georgia at the moment. But Dylan Brooks, Cody Brown, Rock Taylor, Tennessee won the Jamarion Gooch battle, but that doesn't mean that Tennessee is going to beat out Auburn. They might, and things are looking good. Don't want to suggest otherwise. Tennessee's doing a great job of continuing to recruit Rock Taylor, Cody Brown, Dylan Brooks, but it's going to be a dogfight until the end.
Yeah, you look back since Jeremy Pruitt's been here, it seems like there's been more of those than you can count. Wanye Morris, Jalen McCullough, Ramel Keaton, they all had offers in for those guys. It came after all those guys. Last cycle, don't even want to start about the Jay Hardy situation, but man,
that was interesting.
That was tough for a lot of people to follow. That recruitment was more than interesting. So, but yeah, I mean, it's been this way. And if you want to take that next step, you have to beat those teams. And so far, Tennessee's went head to head and won their fair share of battles. So it's going to continue. It's not going to end. They're going to recruit a lot of the same geographical area. They're both going to be in Atlanta. They're both going to be in the mid-state. They're both going to be in Alabama. So you're going to see a lot more of this as time goes on.
The last thing I want to address before we get out of here, Matt, is Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, the 4-star defensive tackle from Gaffney, South Carolina. I would say, correct me if you disagree, but I would probably say the second most coveted defensive player left on Tennessee's board. I think Smile Munden would obviously be number one, and then Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins would be right behind Smile Munden. Maybe you can make a case for Terrion Arnold or Nyland Green, the two defensive backs. But I think Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, just because of the position he plays, and Tennessee needs more pass rushers and big bodies up front. The second most coveted defensive player on the board is Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, in my opinion, and he released a top 4 on Wednesday night, his final 4 on Wednesday night. Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, all the schools that were expected to be in there. Where do you think Tennessee currently stands with Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins?
Tough kid to read. Doesn't give out a lot of information. He enjoys the recruiting process, I believe. Has obviously been close to a decision a couple of times, picked up different offers. Talking to some people around him, around his recruitment that know him, that have heard from other schools. I think Tennessee, you're looking at more of a Tennessee-Georgia battle right now. I think South Carolina factors in during this, last 2 to 3 weeks. I haven't heard anything much about North Carolina. I was kind of surprised to see them in the mix there, but at the same time, that's another program that's done well. But yeah, I think Tennessee and I think Tennessee's really probably going head-to-head with Georgia there, and I don't think you can ever discount South Carolina. The longer that recruitment goes, the more chance I give South Carolina in that. But Tennessee's been in this recruitment for the long haul. They've done well. They've recruited them by committee. So, I think ultimately at the end of the day, you saw Georgia get a commitment earlier from Marlin Dean. That's another, guy that they really coveted that's a little bit lower rated. Like we've talked about today with a couple of these offensive linemen. He's a guy that's a little bit lower rated, but they wanted him bad. They've let him commit to their class for the second time. He decommitted and came back. So, what does that do for Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins' spot at Georgia when they're still recruiting the likes of Mason Smith, Corey Foreman? They're still in on a lot of different guys. So how does that shake things up? Does that kind of accelerate him to want to look at Georgia even more? Where do things stand with Tennessee now? So I think, there's a lot of variables in that recruitment still left to play out. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how it does. I think maybe the commitment of Dean opens up the door for South Carolina to come back and say, hey, man, we really need you in this class. We want you to be that guy. They were able to win out for Jordan Burch last year. They've got so much to sell there. So the longer it goes, the more I like Tennessee or South Carolina win out. I think right now Georgia has some of the momentum. It's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out, though. A kid that I'm going to have to get on the road and go see and evaluate in person, because if you watch his tape from last year, he has continued to transform his body. He's added extremely good weight, close to 30 pounds. He's grown, and he has really good film last year. But it's easy to see with the measurables that he's added why college coaches are so interested in him. So a really fun recruitment, a kid with tremendous upside. And he was mentioning that he only received a few calls last year on September 1st to the junior recruits. So, he's a guy that I think is going to enjoy the process for a little bit if he can.
And I don't blame him one bit. He has turned into quite the prospect. And you mentioned South Carolina's ability to sell him on the fact that they really need him. Tennessee can do the same thing. Tennessee can do the same thing. They have Katron Evans committed, who Tennessee really likes, another athletic interior lineman. But outside of that, there aren't many options left for Tennessee along the defensive line and front seven. So I think Tennessee can also sell Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins on that. And I've kind of got the same feel as you do on that recruitment. He continues to waffle back and forth. Every week is a different favorite for him, and that's why you've heard about him come close to making a decision on multiple occasions. And then he has gotten other offers that has made him sit back and kind of reflect on what he should do. And you totally understand that from his perspective. It's truly a 40-year decision. I know that's thrown around in recruiting a lot, but it truly is. And he needs to make the best decision for him. But Tennessee is firmly in the mix for Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins. I think Tennessee and Georgia are the two teams out front for him right now. Will be fun to watch that one play out. Matt, this has been a fun first episode of you and I rocking here on the latest Rocky Top Insider podcast. And it's a great time to talk Tennessee recruiting. Football is absolutely crushing it in recruiting. Tennessee baseball just locked up a top 20 recruiting class, which is remarkable when you consider the state of the Tennessee baseball program over the last decade to 15 years. Pre-Tony Vitello, he's lighting it up on the recruiting trail. The Lady Vols are adding 5-star after 5-star after 5-star, and obviously Tennessee basketball and Rick Barnes has been incredible during his tenure here at Tennessee, and already has the number one point guard in the country locked in for 2021, and it looks like Tennessee is going to add another top 50 player next week on September 8th when 4-star small forward, shooting guard, wing player, however you want to describe him. Top 50 player is how I describe him, and he plays out on the wing. Jamai Mashak, I hope I didn't butcher his name too bad, from Rancho Cucamonga, California. Big-time basketball player. Tennessee is trending for him. And then Ryan Matumbo, the son of Dikembe Matumbo, the greatest shot blocker in NBA history. Tennessee is also trending for him as well. He's a top 100 center from Atlanta. So a lot of good things going on in recruiting, Matt. I enjoyed today's podcast, getting the RTI Recruiting Podcast back and going. How can people follow you and your work to keep up with the latest Tennessee recruiting news and Tennessee team news?
Yeah, so you can head over to si.com/college/Tennessee to check out our website, fully interactive community there. You could go in, post questions anytime you want, interact with other people. It's continuing to grow, they're still working some kinks out here and there, but, sign up for emails, whatever you want to come out, whatever kind of alerts. We do all of our recruiting chats on there, so it's free to join. So you might as well come on and at least check it out. You can get notified. You can find us on Twitter at VR2 on SI, at Facebook, just VR2 on SI, and then on Instagram, VR2 on Sports Illustrated. So anywhere you want to go, we have the content that you're looking for. Feel free to always reach out any way you want to. DM, shoot us notes on Twitter. We try to be responsive, reactive, and get back to you as much as we can. So, Ben, again, I know it took us a little while to get here, but I'm glad we're here, enjoyed it, and look forward to doing this more often with you.
Absolutely. He is Matt Ray. I am Ben McKee. We look forward to bringing you another Rocky Top Insider recruiting podcast next week. We hope you all have a great weekend. Be sure to stay locked into Rocky Top Insider and VR2 as we continue to cover Tennessee Fall Camp, Tennessee recruiting. Players are speaking to the media on Friday. Guaranteno, who is having a sneaky, really impressive fall camp, will be speaking with the media. Latrell Bumpus, Theo Jackson, they are also speaking with the media. Tennessee is scheduled to scrimmage on Saturday, and Jeremy Pruitt will speak after the scrimmage as well. So be sure to check out Rocky Top Insider and VR2 as we continue to bring you great coverage anywhere you want to find it on Tennessee football and Tennessee football recruiting. For Matt Ray, I'm Ben McKee. Enjoy your weekend. We'll talk to y'all next time.